So what is a fraction? A fraction is when you take the whole of something, whether that's a shape or the whole of a number or the whole of maybe an amount of something, so maybe some money or an ingredient. You take the whole of it and you split it into equal sections. So these resources are really useful because they split equally into sections, and the sections are always the same size. So if you were to take one of these, you'd be taking a quarter. But if somebody else gave you a smaller piece and said that this was a quarter, you'd be very unhappy because it's not the same size. Okay, and how we write a fraction as a number, so a number fraction, is we have a line like this, and we've got a numerator, which is a little number that goes on top, and a denominator, which is the number that goes on the bottom. The numerator tells you how many pieces of the thing you have. So a good analogy is pizza. So if you had 2 pieces of pizza, at the top of the fraction you would say, I have 2. And the denominator tells you the size. So if you've got 2 quarters, that's 2 of something that's broken down into 4. 2 out of 4. You have 2 out of 4 pieces of pizza. And one of the things children get confused by quite a lot is that as this number here goes up, it actually means smaller pieces. In fact, if I leave that there, so that means 2 quarters that look like this. But if we take this one here and we have 2 pieces, so here's 2 pieces again, if I just separate them out, 1, 2, 2 pieces out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this fraction shows sixths. So the denominator is bigger. 6 we know is bigger than 4, but a bigger denominator means smaller pieces. So 2 sixths, as you can see, is actually less than 2 quarters. So 2 quarters is more than 2 sixths. Now this is the first thing that can confuse children, because all their lives they've been told that a bigger number means more. And now we're saying that a bigger number here actually means a smaller amount. But what you need to understand fundamentally is that this isn't a bigger number. The fraction is a smaller fraction, 2 sixths. 2 sixths is smaller than 2 quarters. It's only the denominator that's bigger, and all that means is that the same thing has been chopped into more pieces. If you were to have 2 100ths, that is the same as having a very, very tiny amount. Because if you imagine the same size shape chopped into 100 and you only have 2 of those 100ths, then they would be very small indeed. So a high denominator means smaller pieces. So that is what a fraction means. Okay, so finding a fraction of a number. Sometimes a child or an adult might need to find a fraction. So this fraction says 1/3, 1 out of 3. And the first mistake that children will often make with this is they see the 3 and they hear the word third and they think 3. And so they say, there you go, that is a third, because a third is 3. But a third isn't 3. 3 is 3 wholes, whereas 1/3 is part of the whole. So if we're classing all of this Lego as the whole and we want a third of the whole, then we have to work out what that is. And the first bit of information you must have is how many is in this collection. So what is the number that we're starting with? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we're actually finding a third of 12. And a third of 12 will be different from a third of 60 or a third of 36. So we have to know what we're starting with before we can find a third. The next thing to do is to just visualize it, because that gets us away from thinking the number 3. So actually what we've got is we've got the number 12. And I'm sorry that the pen's not better. Lack of resources at home. And then we know that 1 out of 3 means that we're splitting this number into 3. Okay, and this is exactly what it looks like when we just do a straight division question. So if we have 12 and we divide it into 3 equal parts, that is exactly the same as finding 1/3 of 12. 1/3 of 12. And if you know your 3 times table, you will know how many 3s go into 12. Every 3 that goes into 12, each third gets 1 each. So that's 1 3. That's 2 3s. That is 3 3s. And that is 4 3s go into 12. So we've got 4 each. And so here we can say that 1/3 of 12 is 4. 1/3 of 12 is 4. So we found 1/3 of 12. Now the reason you might write a fraction is because you might actually want 2/3 of 12, in which case you first work out what a third is. 1/3 is 4, and then you can easily work out 2/3. So 2/3 would be 4 and 4, 8. 3/3 of 12 would be 12, because 3/3, if we use 3/3, that's the same as having everything. That's 3 out of 3, all 3/3. Okay, another tricky thing when it comes to fractions is when children are given an amount of something like this. This is 6p. It's a 2, a 2 and a 2, and they're asked to find a half. And so they know that they start with the whole amount, 6p, but then when they come to splitting it in half, they're not sure what to do with this part here. But numbers are very flexible and they can be broken down. So a 2p can be broken down into 2 pennies, 3p on each side, 3p and 3p. So half of 6 is 3. The same goes for if you were to half 30. When children are first using a number like 30, they'll often say, oh, you can't halve it. And that's because their understanding of 3 is that 3 is an odd number and it can't be halved into even amounts. It can be halved, of course, into 1.5, but that's getting into decimals and we're jumping ahead a little bit there. And so they think 3 tens can't be halved. But of course, you can have a 10, and 10 is very easy to be broken down. I haven't got any 5 counters, but I have got 5 pences. So that is still 10, 5 and a 5. And so 1 10 on this side, 1 10 on that side, and half a 10 on each side makes 15. And so it is always possible to halve a number. It gets a little bit trickier once you see a larger number, because what children want to do is to take 372 and make 3 separate piles, or they end up trying to make 372 dots. And of course that's going to take forever and it's probably going to lead to error. But if we go back to just drawing our clever bar, knowing that the amount we're starting with is 372, and that if we are finding 1 out of 3 parts of this number, what that means is that we are splitting the number equally into 3 equal parts. Then what you do at that point is you remember that this is just division. This is just division, which is a method that we've already learnt, we've already talked about. So rather than drawing 372 different dots in 3 boxes, which will take forever, we can go back to our written method. And if you've forgotten how to do that, there is a longer video about bus stop methods for written methods. So I've written down my starting number here, 372, and I'm dividing by 3. So I'm going to work through that. How many 3s out of 300s? That's 1. How many 3s in 7? That's 2. Carry 1 over. How many 3s in 12? That's 4. So 124 would be 1/3 of 372. Okay, so if you were asked to find 2/5 of a larger number, then we start off thinking, okay, the large number is the whole, and I'm finding 2 parts of a whole that's divided into 5. And so we can draw a bar and we make sure we're dividing it into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces. So we recognise this as a division. We're taking this number and we are dividing it equally by 5. So that should take you to the stop method. How many 5s in 465? So we're going to use that to work out 1/5. How many 5s in 4? The 400 is 0. Carry the 4 over. How many 5s in 46? That would be 9 with 1 carried over. And how many 5s in 15? That would be 3. So that tells me that 1/5 is 93. So I just put 93 in those boxes because each box is worth exactly the same, because with fractions every part is equal. So 93, 93, 93, 93, 93. I've split that into fifths. But this one asks for 2/5. And so 2/5 is this much. It's a fifth and a fifth. 93, add 93. And if that one's a little bit tricky, then you can always go back to your written methods. You could either do times by 2. Oh, I was thinking times 2 in my head, but I'm doing an addition here. 3 add 3 is 6. 9 and 9 is 18. So 2/5 of 465 would be 186. Not a very good pen, but hopefully that makes sense. Once you're a little bit more confident with fractions, you can do some problem solving. So if 2/3 of a piece of cake weigh 240 grams, how much does the whole cake weigh? Now, in this question, you don't know how heavy the whole cake is. So the whole cake would be 3/3. All you know is how heavy 2/3 are. But that's okay, because we know that we're splitting it into thirds. The denominator is 3, so that means thirds. Now, we don't know what a third is yet, but what we do know is we know how much 2/3 weigh. So this is the whole cake. This would be the cake in thirds, but here are 2/3. We know that 2/3 are 240. Okay, so actually, I could halve that, because actually to find a third of this amount, I can see that I need to halve that, and that is a little bit more confusing, but hopefully you can see from that diagram, and that diagram will help you. So if 2/3, so there's 1/3, and there's the other third, weigh 240 grams, then each of those thirds must weigh 120, 120, which means that this last third here must also weigh 120. There we go. And so using 3 times 120, or 120 add 120 add 120, or 240 add one more slice, 120, you can work out the weight of the whole cake. So I can see there, because I've got my counters, that I've got 300s and I've got 6 10s. So 300, 300s and 6 10s. 300 and 6 10s makes 360. So the whole cake weighs 360 grams.